Okay. And so over to you, Sammy.
Lovely, thank you, Anne. And thank you everybody for coming this evening to hear me speak. I'm going to share my screen shortly, which means that I'm not going to be able to see anybody, as we found out earlier when we were testing out the technology. So if I'm talking too quickly or if something's not working, just shout at me, Anne, because I won't be able to see any gestures. It looks like some people might have got issues with background echo, maybe, but maybe just one person at the moment.
Let's have a look.
Just before I start, I'll let you guys sort that out.
Yeah, I think just Jane was in twice. I've kicked you out once, so hopefully, Jane, you're okay now.
You okay? Claire, CJ, I can see your name twice, she says. Who are you referring to?
Yeah, Jane was in twice, but I've kicked one of Jane out, so we should be fine now. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah, I think we're probably okay, but I'll keep looking in the chat in case anything occurs. But yeah, go for it.
Okay, lovely. I'll just get the presentation on screen share. Can you see and hear and see me and hear me okay, Anne? And see the presentation?
I can see you and hear you. I don't see, yeah, you're fine, but you aren't sharing yet.
I'm not sharing yet.
No.
Okay. Bear with me a second. How about now?
There you are. That's it.
Lovely. There we go. Second time lucky.
And yeah, that's brilliant.
Working? Lovely. Thanks very much. Yeah, so I work for a charity called Butterfly Conservation. And I started with butterfly conservation in June 2024. And I'm going to be calling it BC for short from now on, just to make it a bit easier on my voice. So for those of you that aren't a member or haven't heard of BC before, so we're a UK-wide charity. We don't have a main office base. We've got a small office in Dorset for any of you that are based near there or have been there before. But most of us work remotely across the UK, including myself. So I work from home but have a national role. And we were formed as a charity over 50 years ago, but we are actually here as a result of our branch volunteers. So that's a real testament to their hard work, and that continues to today. So we really wouldn't be anywhere without our BC volunteers. So again, thank you anybody in the audience that is a volunteer for Butterfly Conservation. And we're really here, put simply, to ensure that everybody living in the UK experiences a world where butterflies and moths thrive and can be enjoyed for everyone forever. So that's it, short and simple, but it summarises really nicely what we are aiming to do as a charity. And you can see our strategy and mission just here as well. So these are just some of our achievements. We obviously don't have time to go into all of them this evening. As a charity, and we are globally respected for our science and conservation work across the globe. Obviously with a focus on butterflies and moths, and we carry out landscape scale projects to reverse the decline of species. So we are here as a charity to essentially stop extinctions of butterflies and moths in the UK. We've been really successful with some of that work. We also work on a government level to lobby and campaign government to take better action to protect butterflies and moths, and obviously wider pollinators as a whole will benefit from that work. And we're also world famous for some of our citizen science work, including the Big Butterfly Count, which hopefully some of you might have taken part in last year and will do this year. But I'm here this evening, and thank you very much for the invitation, Anne, to talk to everybody about an area of work which is my main focus, which is our Wild Spaces programme. So Wild Spaces is Butterfly Conservation's flagship engagement programme. And I sit within BC's engagement and volunteering team. So our focus as a team and as a programme of work for Wild Spaces is about engagement and outreach. So it's not a traditional conservation project that some of you might have seen conservation charities undertake before. And it's really here to enable us as a charity to do better at reaching new audiences across the UK. And you can see some of our key audiences here that we're looking at working at through our Wild Spaces programme. So that's communities living in areas of green space deprivation. And when we say green space deprivation, we mean people living more than 10 minutes walk from an accessible green space. And preferably, when we say green space, we mean a green space that actually has nature in it rather than just really tightly mown grass. And then young people, so people under the age of 35. So I just fit into that category until May this year. And then communities from minoritized ethnic backgrounds. And as a result of those core audiences for our Wild Spaces work, a lot of that, the focus of our Wild Spaces projects is taking place in urban environments. So hence this talk tonight has a focus on looking at habitat creation through more of an urban lens. And then secondary to that, for our Wild Spaces work, is about transforming spaces for butterflies and moths, but it's essentially a people-based programme of work for us as a charity. And I think Wild Spaces is really fantastic as a programme because it provides everybody with the opportunity to discover butterflies and moths. So it's not just about people that live near a nature reserve or have massive gardens. It really is about everybody being able to access and enjoy butterflies and moths. And our projects across the UK are also giving people in those communities the skill sets to be able to take action on their doorstep and also provide them with the skills to look after those wild spaces in the future. And what's really lovely about Wild Spaces is that they are community centred. So there's no one size fits all wild space. And we work with local communities where we have projects to make sure that they actually fit the needs of local communities. So I won't go into loads of depth this evening about our projects, but if you are interested, you can check out some of the web links that are inserted into the meeting chat. We'll tell you a little bit more about them, but I'll just briefly cover them now. So we have flagship projects across the UK, which we've been lucky enough to secure external funding for. So particularly people like the National Heritage Lottery Fund, but also other corporate partners as well. We've been really lucky to be able to receive funding to be able to do those projects and have paid for project officers. So we've got 2 projects that have been undertaken in Scotland, with a new one starting this year in Glasgow. And then we had a schools focused project in Bristol, which some of you might have seen in the news for all of its achievements. And then our newest project, which is in Leeds with Leeds City Council. And all of these projects were formed in partnership with community stakeholders, so particularly councils. And as I said, I won't have time to kind of go into all the details about individual projects, but I just wanted to put some of the quotes from the participants of these projects just to kind of reiterate the importance of us as a charity working with different audiences, but also particularly in urban settings. So a lot of the pupils with the Bristol project in particular, so these are quotes from the teachers and pupils that the project officer worked with, a lot of them didn't actually have access to gardens and green spaces at home. So this picture here on the right is from a school where the pupils' access to green space was literally just AstroTurf before this project came in, and then installed a living wall. So it's really, really important that we are, as a charity, trying to work and reach for people that don't have that luxury of green space access, either in their gardens or on their doorstep. And these are just some lovely quotes from our project in Stirling and Perth in Scotland, which is quite different from the Bristol project because it was working in more community-based settings. And this is a really nice photo because it features a raised bed, which is actually wheelchair friendly, which I've not seen before in projects. So really, really lovely to see. But if anybody has any questions about those projects and the work that we're doing, I'm very happy to take them after the end of the talk. So the main reason that Anne invited me to come to speak this evening was to talk about the work that we can all do in our urban settings and at home to try and make our gardens and green spaces and brownfield sites and urban settings better for butterflies and moths as wildlife as a whole. So a lot of people might ask, why would you garden for wildlife? I'm sure that I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but there's some really key things to think about when you're looking at this. So obviously most of the species that we take for granted a lot of the time in the UK wouldn't function properly without a fully functioning ecosystem. So it's really important that we look at our gardens in a more holistic approach and try and think about how we can support every single thing and every single niche where possible. And obviously not just in gardens, but also in urban settings as well. And just using this species here, which is the blue tit, so just to raise one brood of chicks, poor blue tit parents will consume up to over 30,000 caterpillars to get a brood fledging the nest. So you can see how we need a whole ecosystem approach when we're doing gardening for wildlife. There's obviously also significant human well-being benefits, both for mental and physical health, for having better quality green spaces surrounding us and green spaces with access to nature connection as well. So there are lots of reports out there about the benefits that will bring to human well-being. And more importantly, you could argue there are actually there's more potential green space in particularly garden settings than there is access to nature reserves for wildlife. So if everybody was doing just something for wildlife in their garden, that has the potential to make an absolutely massive difference for wildlife as a whole. And there's also benefits for us in the future in terms of climate change adaptation and resilience through things like drought resistance and shading in our green spaces. Obviously, we're slightly biased at Butterfly Conservation because we are here to think about butterflies and moths and why are they important in our approach. So butterflies and moths are really interesting. They have obviously an aesthetic value, which hopefully is really obvious, and hopefully somebody in this room might have been lucky enough to see their first butterfly this year. I've already seen some brimstones out today and also some peacocks and common butterflies, and obviously they are absolutely beautiful species. Obviously butterflies stand out a bit more for a lot of people, but obviously moths are also really beautiful species in their right, so they have a really obvious aesthetic value. They've also been here for a really, really long time. So butterflies and moths as species have been here for at least 50 million years, and they're a massively diverse group with over 250,000 species. They're also a fantastic educational resource because of their interesting life cycles, so things like chrysalises, in terms of teaching young people about biodiversity and conservation. And they're also really important for science in their own right. So for a really long time now, they've been used for biological research, and that includes evolution research, genetics, and also navigation, interestingly, as well. And as I mentioned before, with the blue tits as an example, they are really, really important in terms of ecosystem function. If we have more butterflies and moths, we are essentially going to have more things up the food chain that rely on them for their food source. So the more butterflies and moths, more things like bats, for example, that you might get in your ecosystem. And they are also, sadly for butterflies and moths, they are known as the canaries in the coal mine. So due to their lack of mobility widely as species, and their slower rate of adaptation, they are often one of the first kind of warning signs of lack of ecosystem function and also climate change, unfortunately. So just going back to wild spaces, so when we say wild space, for butterflies and moths, we are looking, put simply, as anything that creates either feeding, breeding or shelter habitat. Now, obviously, ideally, for a wild space, we'd want them to have all three of those things to make it better for butterflies and moths and other species as well. But it doesn't have to be all three of those things. And that's a really important thing to mention because obviously not everybody has access to a really large garden or green space to be able to make one. And why should we make wild spaces and make habitat for butterflies and moths and other species? Well, like a lot of insects, sadly, butterflies and moths are on a UK-wide downward trajectory. So it's really important that we, as local communities and as individuals, take every step that we can to try and to reverse those declines and make the differences that we can on our doorstep. And wild spaces are also really easy and cheap to do, which we'll find out in a few slides' time. And they're also obviously really important ways to try and reverse that green space deprivation, which is really common in urban settings, and through doing that, boost human well-being. So just talking now about some of the things that we can do at home and in our communities, and some of the things you could talk to, for example, your local parish council about in terms of making more wild spaces that support butterflies and moths. So one of the first things to kind of think about when you're looking at your garden or you're talking to your local parish council or your local school is how we can support the whole life cycle of butterflies and moths, because that often gets forgotten about. And people might think about just their nectar and their food source, but actually all those three stages of the life cycle are really important. And if we don't support all of them, eventually you're going to have those butterflies and moths declining in your local area. So just talking about feeding, so obviously this is more focused on this image on the adults that you might see coming out in warm weather this spring. And one of the kind of first pieces of advice that we tend to give is to avoid what we call plastic plants. So those classic plants that you might see in garden centres and in hanging baskets are actually not much good for our native pollinators and butterflies, obviously, and moths included in that, but also other species. So our first piece of advice is to ditch those plants where you can. We know that they're quite popular with people because of their ability to bring colour, but there's also other ways of doing that. So obviously the first easy thing to do where you can is to choose native. So obviously all of our native pollinators, so including butterflies and moths in this, but also other species, have evolved and adapted with our native plant species. So their kind of feeding and breeding and shelter life cycle is based around our native plant species. So where you can, try and choose native species. And if you're not able to find native ones, or you want to just bring a bit more seasonality and colour into your garden or landscape, the other important thing to think about when you're looking at plants is to choose species that have landing platforms as flowers. So a lot of these species that you see above here, these plastic plants, one of the reasons that they're not so good for our native pollinators is because there's no way for them to actually get into them and feed, and sometimes not an easy way for them to land on them in the first place. So if you're not using native species and you're looking for a wider variety of colour, try and pick plants and flowers that have that really easy accessible landing platform. So using echinacea as an example of that, where you've got that open, essentially like a helicopter pad for things like butterflies and moths to land on. And obviously, where possible, try and cover the season so you've got that wider variety of flowering plants throughout the year. And then obviously, just going back to my earlier comment that every size counts with a wild space, that even if you've just got room for some hanging baskets or pots outside your front step, that will still make a difference for something that's out there hungry, particularly at this time of year. So these are just some of the examples of the species that you could plant through the summer and autumn, and some species here that do really, really well in window boxes, particularly through the drier months in the summer. Your herbs, for example, will do much better in that drought period. And I have also shared this presentation in the chat. So if anybody's interested, you don't need to write down the species listed here. You can refer to the chat later in the presentation if you'd like to have a look at those species. So the second, obviously, really important stage of the life cycle to try and support is the breeding part of the life cycle. So the thing that sometimes gets forgotten about again after feeding. And we've just got some photos here, and I think these are really cool because you can just see how small some of the butterflies and moth species eggs are, and they're really easy to miss in your garden. So it's actually quite easy to tidy away, particularly some of these native species. So this is Jack by the hedge, or garlic mustard, I think is the other colloquial name for the species. And you can just see these little orange eggs here. So it's another important thing to remember, to try not to be too tidy in your garden. So as I mentioned with the feeding, it's the same with the breeding. So most of our species, so again for butterflies and moths, but also other pollinators, will prefer to lay their eggs on native plants, and they've been evolved to actually be able to seek out those native plant species and lay their eggs on them. So you've got a quite cool picture here because you can just see the eggs being laid in this photo. And unfortunately, not everybody likes to hear this, but a lot of our kind of much maligned plant species, so things like nettles and thistles, are much loved by our butterflies in particular. So you can see some of these species here. So if you do have space in your garden for some of these species, they're definitely worth keeping in. And what you can do, particularly with plants like nettles, is you can actually grow them in pots to try and constrain them a little bit from taking over the entirety of your garden. And obviously, most people, I'm sure in this meeting, know that the cabbage white family in particular, so the whites, really, really love brassicas. So anybody that's got an allotment has probably seen their caterpillars munching away on that. And a little bit of advice here, I guess, is if you can, and particularly for allotments, is to create sacrificial plant areas, or to do companion planting, where you can plant species and essentially move the caterpillars on to those plants that are being sacrificed. And if you've got the space, and obviously not everybody does, the trees and shrubs are also really important. So again, picking native species, because the flowers will provide nectar, but also the leaves will provide feed for butterflies and moths. And there's just some nice species lists here, which again, you can refer to in the presentation after this meeting. And the third part of the cycle, so the shelter for the wild space, is probably the one that gets forgotten the most, I would say, not just in people's gardens, but also in community spaces that are owned by people like councils. And it's really, really easy to miss the species that are sheltering in our gardens. So this photo here is of a butterfly egg, and this makes it look really large in the photo, but it's actually tiny and really easy to miss. So it's really easy for all of us to inadvertently clear away a lot of butterflies and moth species that are sheltering on our gardens. So where possible and where you've got the room, it's always a really good idea to leave areas untidied and unclear and let those plant species die back naturally. So caterpillars in particular are really good at going into the plant stems that we really like to tidy away. And that's the same with grasses as well, which I'll touch on in a second. And you can see here this species in particular, so the meadow brown, the caterpillar actually stays in the bases of long grasses over winter. So they're really easy to be missed and unfortunately mown, particularly in council-owned settings. And just a little nod to our native trees and shrubs. So they provide everything in terms of a wild space that a butterfly or a moth might need for its life cycle. But I appreciate not everybody has the space for them in their garden. But if you do have a contact in your local parish council or your town council, it's worth advocating for native species planting. And you can also advocate for planting species, particularly fruit trees, because they will also provide obviously benefits for people in terms of free food. And I just want to touch a little bit on long grass and meadows in particular. So long grass obviously has been controversial in the past, particularly in places like park settings and community sites. I'm very pleased to say that through organisations like Plant Life, as an example, through things like No Mow May, the kind of reputation of leaving things unmown is getting better, but there's still some challenges around that for us as an organisation, particularly in those community settings. And long grass in itself, so not necessarily meadows, is also really, really important. So there are species like meadow brown in particular, some of our more browner butterflies as a whole that will rely on grass species, so native UK grass species, for the whole of their life cycle. So if you have got an area of your lawn that you can leave uncut for the whole year, that's actually really, really important, and obviously doesn't take much effort for us to maintain, which is really good for most of us. So in terms of not having to get the lawnmower out more often than not. Now, if any of you do have the space, or if any of you are interested in working with your parish council or town council, trying to make a meadow is a really fantastic and interesting thing to do as a local community. And there's a couple of things you can do. So obviously what you could do is just simply leave an area unmown to see what species come up, which is what I did with my local parish council in Devon. Or you can actually look to put in a seed mix. So one of the really interesting things about meadows is that conversely, you want to try and make it as nutrient poor as possible. And one of the issues with difficulties for a lot of community groups and volunteers working in parkland sites, as an example, is a lot of those are very heavily dominated by grass. So unless you're taking off that top layer, so this kind of step one down here, that top layer of soil and grass, it can take a really, really long time for those wildflower species to establish, if at all, if they're completely outcompeted by grass. So the ideal, if you want to get the kind of nicest looking meadow in your local area or in your garden, if you've got a big enough garden, is to cut and lift all the vegetation in the autumn, and then to actually cut downstream down to soil level, and then use a native seed mix. So there's some supplies that we can recommend after this meeting if anybody's interested, and to actually sow in perennial native wildflower seeds. And obviously, I'm sure some of you already know the species in this call, but we also recommend using yellow rattle, which is also known as the meadow maker, because that actually parasitizes on grasses, and it will actually hammer away at the grasses over the years. And one of the obviously important things, again, to mention, if you have got the space, is to leave some areas uncut over winter. So particularly for those species like meadow brown, where you have their caterpillars sheltering in the lower parts of the grass, to leave actual areas untouched over winter. So obviously a really important part of the meadow life cycle is that cut and collect. So one of the important things to mention is if you are lucky enough to again work with a parish council or a town council that are happy to go out and do the mowing themselves, is to make sure that you're not leaving the cuttings of the grass sat down on the meadow, because then that increases that nutrient level and makes it harder for those wildflowers to come through, because the grasses are going to outcompete them. And by doing this, even if it's just in a really small area, you'll benefit some native UK butterfly species, so species like small copper and ringlet, and more commonly known species like meadow brown as well. Just a couple of really important final things to mention. I'm sure most of you guys know this already, but obviously where you can, particularly if you're using produce from a local garden centre, is to try and use peat-free soil and compost where possible, because obviously that has quite negative implications in terms of carbon, but also to remove the use of chemical usage. So again, it's quite an interesting one to work with local parish and town councils, and also in school settings as well. So butterfly conservation last year, our campaigns team did actually do a open letter to a lot of big suppliers, so particularly people like B&Q and some quite large retailers, to ask them to remove the wholesale use, so for public use for herbicides and pesticides. So I can talk about that a little bit later in the meeting if people are interested. So that's just a very, very whistle-stop tour, because I only had about 45 minutes this evening to talk about wild spaces and wildlife gardening. But if any of you are interested, we do also have lots of free resources available on our Wild Spaces website. And if any of you would be interested in talking to your parish council or your town council, or like a community group or a school, and want some advice on how to do that, we can also set up some like Teams meetings and support for local groups to be able to try and take some positive influence in their local area. And we have lots and lots of free resources, and some of them I've popped in the meeting chat links to. So things like our schools guide for primary schools and secondary schools to make wild spaces in their school grounds, but also our urban butterfly guide, which is there for the use of parish and town councils. And it's also worth mentioning, as well as obviously the calls for everybody to make wild space where they live, is for everybody to get involved in a little bit of citizen science. So I mentioned earlier our Big Butterfly Camp. So that's our biggest citizen scientist initiative that we take, that takes place every year in July and August. And the year before last was unfortunately the worst year on record for the Big Butterfly Count. So we're hoping that it will be a bit better this year in terms of population numbers. But if you get really interested and keen, you can also start to record butterflies and moths in your local area. So particularly through the app like I Record Butterflies is a really easy way to do that. And then if anybody is even more keen, you can also sign up to be one of our UK butterfly monitoring Transect volunteers as well. So that's for anybody that's got enough time to go out once a week to go out and monitor butterflies and moths. And obviously a plea as well for us to go out and spread the word in your local community. So particularly through wild spaces, that's a really important part of the work that we do as a charity, and particularly from my role, is to go out and try and advocate for community groups to be able to set up wild spaces where they live. And this is just a little photo shoot here, just to demonstrate the variety of wild spaces that we've been able to make as an engagement and volunteering team. And again, just proving that it doesn't really matter what size you're looking at, everything can make a difference for butterflies and moths. And this picture in here, so the bottom one, or second to the left, is actually a picture I took in Plymouth. Just some of ragwort coming up through the cracks in the pavement with lots of cinnabar mothbuck caterpillars on it. So every little bit of greenery can make a really big difference for butterflies and moths. And that's me. So I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody. There we go. I think I'm a little bit ahead of time actually, Anne, aren't I?
Yeah, don't worry. That's fun. It was great, really nice, and there's so much more I would like to know. People have been putting like their sightings, their early sightings in the chat, and it's because I have a question around that. It's interesting because and with our allotment, people have been seeing comma and various other butterflies. But is there a problem with that? In that butterflies come out very, very early. It feels very early to me, but I might be wrong. This might be a very regular sort of.
It can be a problem. It really depends on if they've got enough food when they come out, essentially. So there are I don't know if I live in Devon near Plymouth, just for I guess temperature reference in the UK. So I'm quite far ahead of my colleagues in Scotland, for example. So I've already seen 3 different butterfly species, and they've also been moths caught in some moth traps near Plymouth as well. And we have got some native plants out where I am, so things like celandines. So lots of the yellow spring plants are coming out, as well as obviously things like daffodils. But it kind of depends where that butterfly's emerged and how quickly it can get access to food, and also what happens with the weather, because I think tomorrow it's forecast to be absolutely chucking it down and rain again, so they might get caught out potentially. So it can be an issue for them if they come out too early. The same with other species like bumblebees in particular. If they come out early and then it starts raining and they get cold, then it can be game over for them.
And is there now a trend for butterflies in loss to come out earlier and earlier with climate change?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I can ask. I suspect the answer is probably yes, but I don't know, so I can find out for you. And it's going to depend on the geography and where people are living. But there is a bit of a mismatch with other species as well, particularly like birds and insects for feeding in particular. But I can take that question back, Anne, if that's helpful.
Yeah, it would be. I would be quite interested to find out. Well, we have a question from Emma Turner, who asked, when is the best time of year to cut a meadow area? Emma, do you want to ask that question? I don't know where you are, I can't see. And have you got a meadow, or are you planning to create a meadow?
Thank you. So yeah, we're fortunate we've got a meadow, but we've got quite a large garden. Last year we had probably half of it. We did no mow May a couple of years, and then last year just didn't mow half of the garden. Obviously at the end of the season we did do a cut on it before the winter, but I was just wondering what is the best time of year to do that kind of cut, really, to sort of which kind of causes the least damage, I suppose, to sort of breeding and sort of anything for whether they're sort of hibernating.
So it depends how big your meadow is. So the ideal world would be to always leave an area uncut, but obviously appreciate a lot of people won't have the space for that. So particularly in park settings, you won't have enough room for that. So when we're looking at working with council partners, so our Leeds Wild Spaces project in particular, as an example, is creating 8 meadows across parts of Leeds. And they will do, so you will do a cut and collect between now and the end of March, would be your first one. Again, it's really important that you remove those arisings, because one of the easy things to do is to do the cut and then you leave the grass on the floor and you're essentially building up that nutrient bank. So you want to make sure you try and remove those arisings where possible. And that could just be moving them to one side, then you're potentially creating a little habitat for things like grass snakes. Or you could take it to like a local composting centre. So a lot of councils will just take it to their wider composting scheme. And then from April to the end of July, you're leaving it uncut, essentially. And then you're looking at, again, doing a cut and collect between August and the end of September. And what you want to do in that second cut period is to leave the stuff on the ground for a little bit, just so the seeds drop on the floor, essentially. So particularly for things like yellow rattle, and if you're lucky enough to actually get some native wildflowers in there, you want to try and give them the chance of actually letting the seed drop, and so you're getting that natural seed processing. And between August and the end of September, you could also enhance with yellow rattle seed as well, if you've got access to yellow rattle seed. And then you're leaving it uncut between October and February again. That's the kind of ideal cycle. I'll just pop a little picture in the chat, because there's a really nice little tool, which I can't, I don't think I can paste. Hang on a second. Let me just go to. So I use Plant Life's Meadow Management Wheel, which you might have spotted in the presentation. Let me just pop it in the chat a second. So these guys, if you have got a meadow like Emma, are worth having a look at. So they've got a whole Meadow Management Hub website, and it's got the Meadow Management Wheel, which is like a really nice little easy visual tool to use, but it's also got advice on like growing your yellow rattle, like the seed mixes that you should use on there as well. So that's just in the chat for you to have a look at. And I can also recommend some suppliers in the chat if that's helpful for people as well.
Yeah, that would be helpful if you could do that, because that was one of the questions I have.
Let me do that a second. I'll just mute myself.
While Sammy's doing that, is anybody else to have anything they would like to ask her?
So the link that I've just popped in the chat is the suppliers that we've used for the Leeds Wild Spaces project. So we'd recommend using them as suppliers. In an ideal world, if you're starting out, you might be able to get in touch with your local wildlife trust. So Francis might know a bit about this, because some wildlife trusts have like donor sites for meadows where you're actually able to buy wildflower seed from much nearer to you. But I don't know if you guys have got anything like that near you, Francis.
We've done a bit of it in the past. I don't think we're set up for really doing it that much at the moment, but definitely, we can, if anyone is interested, we can have the conversation. There's also a group in Herefordshire called Herefordshire Meadows, who work with landowners across the county doing just that sort of thing. So there's a lot of it going on. So yeah, there's lots of networks if anyone wants more sort of in-depth information for a larger area, for sure.
You can also just leave it. If you don't want to seed, you can just leave it and see what's coming up. And if you keep hitting the grass every year with the cut, you will eventually get other species coming up. So there's a quite interesting project that was done in Weymouth on some of like the roadside verges, where they were literally just doing that. They weren't enhancing with seed mix, they were just doing cutting and collecting. And after a while, the grasses do eventually kind of get more and more tired, and you'll get other species coming up in between. But if you've got the budget, you could also obviously get a seed mix and enhance it that way.
Okay, there's a question from Robert Hall, another meadow question. Robert, do you want to? Robert? Oh, we need to unmute Robert. Is there any way we can do it from the admin side? Can you unmute?
Okay.
Yeah,
I think
we can hear you. Great.
Just to say, we've got a lovely meadow with a lot of thanks to Herefordshire Meadows, and our meadow is cut for hay in July, and then we have aftermath grazing with a local farmer's sheep in autumn.
This is right.
Any comments on that?
I don't know if I can actually. Can I take that question back? Is that okay, Robert?
Yeah.
Because I've not done much work with meadows that have had livestock in.
Okay.
I can take that question back and then send the answer to Anne if that's okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
Can I ask a question, Anne?
Yeah.
Sammy, does butterfly conservation have a relationship with work at all with the Dark Skies initiative?
Yes. Yeah, we do actually. So my colleague Pip, who did the pesticides campaign, so she's also been working on something called Moon Meadows, and linked up with the Dark Skies initiative, and has been doing some work with councils across the UK. So some of you might have heard of our butterfly cities work that she's done, which is similar to Wild Spaces, around lighting pollution. and the impact on moths in particular, obviously more than butterflies. But there are also known impacts on butterfly caterpillars, because it can cause the caterpillars to come out to feed at different stages when they're not supposed to be. So yes, we have linked those as an initiative. And we've been trying to provide guidance for councils on street lighting and how to adjust that, where in areas where obviously you wouldn't want to remove that lighting for public safety reasons.
No, it was quite interesting because it's just been circulated, the research that Exeter University is doing on how moths move around 85% less around the street lighting. So
Yeah.
it's getting that balance, isn't it? But clearly there is they do have a negative impact on their movement. Yeah. Thank you.
That's okay. I'll also, just going back to Emma's meadow question, so I'm just going to pop another talk from my colleague in Scotland, which is on our BCU YouTube channel, which you might like to watch, Emma. So I've watched it around their meadow creation in parks in Scotland, in city parks. So you might find that useful. And he's got way more experience than me.
Anybody else have a question at the moment?
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
So second question.
Okay,
I've noticed,
go ahead, Robert.
noticed that the small tortoiseshell, which when I was growing up a long time ago was very common, has now been in great decline locally in Herefordshire and also nationally.
Wow.
Do you know why?
I can find out for you. I don't know the exact answer in terms of that particular species. I imagine it's probably a similar story to a lot of our butterflies and moths, unfortunately. So things like habitat loss, chemical use, which we obviously just talked about, and climate change, I would imagine. But there might be some specific ones for that species, which I can come back to you on.
I mean, there is a
I
parasitic.
don't actually work in our ecology team, so I'm not the best.
There is a parasitic.
Go on, sorry,
there
Robert.
is a parasitic fly, but I think that's part of the problem. But I think it's far more than that. I mean, and compared to other previously common butterflies, the decline, as proved by your own butterfly conservation figures, is very marked.
I can speak to my colleagues to get a more thorough answer for you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
It's interesting because I remember when I first started noticing butterflies, there were lots of a lot of the tortoiseshell, the small tortoiseshell, and I have hardly seen any in the last few years. So yeah, interesting.
I don't know if I've ever seen one, actually, to be honest with you.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I have a question, which is like they're very now we're absolutely bombarded. We have daffodils everywhere. Are they any good for butterflies and moths?
I don't know if they are, and it was interesting that you say that, because I was watching my second brimstone of the year this morning land on a daffodil and just kind of aimlessly poke its proboscis on the petals, nowhere near the good stuff that's inside. So I'm not quite convinced, and particularly because you see a lot of them have really nice varieties where they have like the double or the like triple petals, and I guess it goes back to that kind of plastic plants in that a lot of them they just can't get into. I think bumblebees have a better. I've seen bumblebees get into daffodils. I suspect they have a better aim of being able to get inside, but I don't think daffodils are that good for butterflies and moths. And obviously, a lot of them aren't the large variety anyway.
Is that also the case with doubles? Like when you have like cultivated cultivars, they can't get in because it's just so much.
They can't. A lot of them they can't get into. Yeah. So that going back to that kind of slide around the plastic plants of the garden centres, that that kind of traditional window hanging box, a lot of them aren't that good really. And in terms of climate change resilience, you're better off planting stuff like your herbs and your native species in terms of that drought resilience and like water use as well.
And things like native plants, native bulbs like anemones and ransoms and stuff like that. How are they good fodder for butterflies and moths?
Yes, they will be better. Yeah, definitely. And that's a lot of that will just be around their ability to get into them. So that supplier that I popped on the chat, so Emma's Gate, will do native spring and autumn bulbs. So we would recommend using them. And I'll pop another supplier in the chat in a second that I've just ordered some bulbs from for the Leeds project actually. So they will be a lot better, and a lot of moss species in particular. So obviously you'll get some plants that rely on certain species of butterflies and moths for that pollination. So yeah, where possible, go native, and then if you can't go native, try and get something that's got much more open landing platform for them to use.
When you say landing platform, can you be a little bit more explicit? Because I have this picture of like the little helicopter pad.
I mean, hang on, let me just pop. So if I just put an example, I'll just do a screen share a sec. So just bear with me a second. So this is echinacea, which is really, really popular as a garden plant in parks. And this is what I mean by landing platform. So it's just got it's literally like a helicopter pad for them to land on and get their tongue in. Can you see that on the screen share? So they can get in and really easily access it, and it's not that dissimilar to one of my favourite plants, which is the oxeye daisy, which is a native wildflower, and they've got that like really open platform for them to get onto. So they're just literally able to land on it and go straight in. Unlike the daffodil that the brimstone was just kind of aimlessly probing around this morning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And are these flowers, these you kind of have this display of flowers that are good landing platforms. Are they in one of your documents that you've put links for?
Yes, yes. So in the presentation, there are some examples in like the coloured tables, and then if on the Wild Spaces website, which was put in before everybody arrived at the meeting, so it's quite high up on the chat. If you go on to I'll share my screen a sec. Just bear with me. If you go on to the Wild Spaces website, which is a free website, and then go on to our info hub, you can pick what type of wild space you're looking at, and then we've got planting guidance in there. If you scroll down, you can see what plants and species we'd recommend for putting in those wild spaces. And then you've also got a species ID guide in here as well. And obviously we don't cover all the butterflies and moths on that one website, but you can have a look through here. There's loads of things, and we've got some nice blogs as well. So we've got seasonal blogs in there for jobs to do for every month in your garden, and what species you could look at planting as well in here.
Oh, that's great. That's really good.
And then there's also the this urban butterfly guide. So for anybody that wants to have a go at working with their parish or town council, would really recommend this guide here. So this was produced by our Big City Butterflies project in London. So this was actually a predecessor to Wild Spaces, but was essentially doing Wild Spaces creation in London. And it's got a really nice species list in here of plants, and caterpillar food plants, way more than you could talk about in a 45-minute talk. But this is the link to this is in the top of the chat. So the Wild Spaces website link and this brochure link is in there as well. And that's got some nice case studies around grassland and meadow management in here as well for you, Emma, to have a look through.
Great.
And you can, if anybody wants to, we can, if you know of any butterfly conservation volunteers, they can order this brochure to give out at events and stuff. We can send it printed out through the BC branches on here. But this is a really lovely guide, and I tend to send this to park staff for example, in like parish or towns councils, because it's a little bit more for like larger areas than just gardens.
Wow, brilliant. We have this is just some people are not able to get the links from before when they arrived.
Okay, let me pop them in the chat again.
Okay.
So you've got the main Spaces website, which
I don't know which ones they can't
so
see.
Spaces is Butterfly
Claire,
Conservation website.
What is the first one that you can see?
I'm just going to re-pop them in the chat, because I think if people were in the meeting, I might have lost Anne actually. I'll pop them in the chat again.
I can send these round afterwards as well, with the link to the recording, so I can send the links round to everyone that came and people that missed it as well.
Thank you. There's also I'll just pop the butterfly conservation. So we've got habitat guides on our main butterfly conservation website. So I'll just pop that on here. And obviously, Francis, if you need me to email it across as well to you, I can send it in an email.
That's great.
And then we've also got, if anybody is got kids in school or working at school, we've got our Discover and Learn homepage. And if anybody is a beginner to butterflies and moths, there is some really nice entry-level courses on there for people to take part in as well.
Are there any other questions from anybody else, or am I the only person who has lots of questions?
I have a final question.
Yeah.
You talked briefly about doing, for people that are a bit more committed, doing transects.
Yes.
And I think there's actually people on the call probably that run them. And I know we run some on our nature reserves, and the data is shared with BC. But I wonder, just for everyone, if you can talk a little bit more about what's involved, what's the commitment for doing a butterfly transect, and how people can go about getting those set up with you.
Yeah. So, well, it depends what people are interested in. So the ones that I mentioned in the talks, a Big Butterfly Count, which is our like more citizen science focused one, is literally 15 minutes in the sunshine in July and August. So if you're working full time, you've got care responsibilities, and you've literally just want something really short and easy to do that still contributes data, that's a really lovely one to take part in, and really nice one to do with kids as well. Then the kind of next stage up from that is I Record Butterflies, because you can do that as many times as you like, and you don't have to do it within that July and August window, the same as the Big Butterfly Count. So that's kind of, again, I would say, like the next step up from there. And then if you want to go like premium, it's the UKBMS. So I'll just pop a link in the chat to that for people. And that's, I would say that's quite a high level of commitment, because you're looking at going out once a week in obviously the right time of year to go out and monitor butterflies and moths during the day in your local area, in a transect area. And I'll just pop the link in here.
Well, if Sammy's doing that, Francis, is there a way we can preserve the chat, and then I could organize it so that there's a document that has all the links in it?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can do that.
Great.
No problems.
Let me just I'm just going through the maze of our butterfly conservation website.
Could the links go on the website, on the pages?
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, it'd be great.
It'd be really good, because then people who are going to watch the recording can get it later, and we can refer back to it. Thank you.
So the first link I put in there shows you all the different surveys, and then the second link is for the UKBMS one. And if anybody's interested in that scheme, you can get access to training as well. So it does tend to involve volunteers that have like a greater knowledge in terms of ID level, but for anybody that wants to kind of try and step up to that level, there is training involved in that scheme if anybody's interested. But if anybody wants to do that, but wants to kind of get themselves up to scratch, so to speak, in terms of species ID, I'd recommend getting in touch with your local branch. So I'm sure you've got some branch volunteers near you, Francis. And quite a lot of them will run events in the spring and summer, so things like butterfly and moth guided walks, and also moth trap opening sessions. So if you're anything like me, so when I started working for BC, I'd come from more of a bird-based background, as Anne hinted at, with my work with the RSUB. So I kind of wanted to do quite a lot of work to kind of get a bit more up to scratch before going out and doing those surveys. But it's definitely worth doing. But if anybody feels like they want to get their ID kind of more up to scratch first, I'd recommend going out with the branch. But I've popped the UKBMS, excuse me, link in there. There's also the Wide Countryside Butterfly Survey as well that people could get involved in. So I'll just pop this in there as well.
I in some ways have a question from Mo, because she works on Bartonshire Meadows along with other volunteers here. And you do butterfly transects, don't you, on Bartonshire Meadows? Is Mo?
No, I think
sorry, Anne, I didn't hear you.
It was just that I was just asking because
yeah, we do, we do, yes. Anna leads on that, and that happens at the right time of year, and that's quite intensive. So yeah, there may be other people on as well that are taking part, and it's incredibly rewarding. Well, most weeks. Some weeks, if the weather's bad, it's dire, but that in itself is interesting to to understand how the weather can affect butterfly sort of movements and other things. So yeah. But Francis will probably have an overview, won't you, Francis?
Yeah, a bit, but let Bob come in here, because he does an awful lot. So I'll let Bob say his bit now.
Okay.
Thank you, Francis. I'm involved with butterfly conservation, have been for quite a long time, but one of the things we do is to monitor butterflies in Hough Wood, both north side and south side. So there's a group of us who do the transect walks, which we've been doing, I think, for perhaps 15 years for the north side and something like 11 years for the south side. So you gradually build up a picture of the trends amongst the butterfly populations over that time. And the other thing the Herefordshire branch does, or under the West Midlands, is that we've got one or two organised walks. We've got at least 3, and they should be appearing in the details of those should be appearing in the comma, which is under a new editor, is about to come out, I believe. But we've got walks. What we find is at the north and west of Herefordshire, where there's possibly less spraying, less intensive farming, of actually very good hotspots for some quite rare butterflies, including things like green hairstreak, small pearl-bordered fritillary, and of course in Hough Wood we've got a population of the rare wood white, which we monitor. So there are a number of walks at anyone from the Wildlife Trust would be very welcome on those. In fact, my colleague Martin Davis and I led a walk last summer at US Harold Common, which we're repeating this year, which some of you might have come on. And we're also going to Hunter Hill and Hergest Ridge at Kington. And we have another walk based in the Olcan Valley, where we're hoping to see small pearl-bordered fritillary. So that's just a sort of brief outline of some of the things going on in Herefordshire for Herefordshire members.
I would really recommend going out with a group, actually, for anybody that wouldn't feel confident enough to do it. So particularly the UKBMS is that kind of, I'd say, step up from things like I record a big butterfly count, really, in terms of both the time commitment and the ID level. So if you want to be able to do that, I would recommend going out with somebody like Robert, to learn the ropes. And go out with binoculars. Binoculars is very helpful for
Yes,
marching.
binoculars are essential, particularly when you're looking for hair streaks.
Yes. Yeah.
Just to add to that, because we annually, the city branch does walks with, well, we did the US Herald one with you, Bob, and Martin Davey.
Yeah.
So for people, just, you know, we have one every year with Martin.
Yeah.
And last year we went out with you as well. So just, you know, keep your eye open on the events coming up, because we do one in the afternoon and one in the morning with and it's just great. I go on it every year. So, and it's sometimes
Yes,
it's
we're
brilliant,
also,
and sometimes it's we have rain, but otherwise it's
yeah,
great.
well, Martin also doing one in July, in middle of July in Huff Wood, specifically for beginners. So anyone who's not confident, it's quite, as Sammy says, it's a good thing to go out with some of us who perhaps slightly more knowledge, and we can share that knowledge and tips. And in any case, it's good to have lots of pairs of eyes to see the.
Yeah, I highly recommend them. I learned something so much every time. There's something from Jane Denny. Jane, do you want to come in?
I think Jane's mentioned that she's lost her voice. You have my sympathy, because I also lost my voice.
Oh yes.
Before. But Jane, just to say, that looks really fantastic what you're doing, and if you would like any other advice or want just like a Teams meeting, which I've done for other community groups and parish councils, I'm very happy to do that. If you've got like any questions or advice, and if you'd like a school session online as well, and potentially the branch might be able to come in and do some. I'm speaking on behalf of the branch now, Robert, but I'm just offering some moth trapping sessions for that school, but I've got no idea if it's anywhere near where you are, but it might be something that your local branch might be able to supply for the school.
Okay.
It's also worth just bearing in mind, so particularly parish councils and schools can often access different funding streams that we can as a charity. So there has been a recent little flurry of activities for grants for schools, for wildlife friendly stuff for schools that you might be able to access, Jane.
Thumbs up, Jane. Great. Any other questions?
I've made a note of your questions, Robert. So when tomorrow, when people are back in work, when you've asked more species specific questions, I'll send them across and get an answer to you, Anne. Would that be okay?
Yeah. Okay. If there are no more questions, I would, or if you want to say anything more. Oh, I have a question.
Oh, God.
Which is about predation of are there any, can you just give us a little bit of the kind of an outline of the kind of issues around caterpillars, because there's an ecosystem, you know, and we see, you know, caterpillars providing great fodder for all sorts of species. The kind of balance and play that's taking place at the moment, is there problems, or is it a good balance?
Well, that's quite a hard question. I mean, it all depends on the species, doesn't it? So it's very normal for a lot of the caterpillars not to turn into butterflies. So whether that's through things like blue tits, but also some of you might have seen some of like the parasitic wasps, which I think, Robert, you mentioned earlier with a tortoiseshell. So in my garden, my landlady's garden in Plymouth a couple of years ago, we had lots of caterpillars, and then they all got parasitized and exploded from the inside out with parasitic wasp coming out of them. But obviously a lot of them have evolved with those species, so they will obviously reduce the number of adult butterflies that you'll get coming as a result of the caterpillars, but it shouldn't, unless there are other factors at play, completely wipe out that population. So like other species, so looking at things like ground-nesting birds as another example, when you have predation having such a detrimental effect, it's often because there are other bigger factors putting pressure on that species. So whether it's things like chemical use, habitat loss, climate change. I mean, that's the same with birds like curlews as well. But it will be very species led. So it's quite hard to answer that as a question. And that's like,
yeah,
they're all going to be different in terms of the different species that we're looking at. And obviously moths, again, you've got that impact of light pollution,
yeah,
like we mentioned earlier as well. And the climate change is an interesting one, because you're going to have winners and losers of species. So some species are going to benefit from climate change, and we're now getting more moths in particular colonised in the UK through climate change, but also through transportation for things like timber and plant supply. So you've got new species coming in. So it's quite hard to answer that question.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, just say a huge thank you to you, Sammy. That was great. And also for the incredible number of links to information, and definitely more exploration of the butterfly conservation website, which looks fantastic, also for the wild spaces. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And I will go away with your questions and come back with more.
Okay, that'd be great. Lovely. Great to have a follow-up.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you,
Yes, so
Sammy.
thank you everybody for coming, and I hope you will take away with you some ideas about, or explore more ideas about how to create more habitat for our butterflies and moths. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Bye.
Okay.
Sammy,
All right.
thanks, Anne.
Bye.
Okay. Cheers. Thank you, Francis, as well.